Jason, welcome to B2B Content Strategist Podcast. It's great to have you on.
It's great to be on. Thanks, Amy.
Very much looking forward to this conversation. To kick this off, Jason, what would be awesome is could you just tell us a little bit about your role what you're doing at B2B Better and all of that good stuff?
Absolutely. So my name's Jason, as you kindly introduced me. I am the founder of a marketing agency called B2B Better. Our goal is to help B2B organizations fix their marketing problem. And essentially what that boils down to is how can we turn marketing from being a cost center within the business to being a revenue driver? And we do that by offering strategic marketing advisory services, looking at strategy, looking at planning, looking at resourcing, and helping organizations figure out where do they want to get to, and how to go about getting there.
Really interesting. And it says on your LinkedIn that you work with some of the most visionary B2B solutions companies to rewrite the status quo on how to win in 2023. What I'd love to know, firstly, how would you define most visionary B2B solution companies? So what do you look for in that to start with?
I think when we're looking at B2B organizations, we can separate them into two general camps. There are the ones that were born in the digital age. Typically, these are SaaS businesses, and they inherently understand how to reach the modern day B2B buyer and how to activate the channels where these buyers are spending time. And then you have another large group of B2B organizations that were born outside of the digital era, who have been around for a long time, and they are very successful for all intents and purposes, but they largely rely on outdated go-to-market strategies. Think of things like, cold outreach, cold outbound, relying on referral networks, doing the odd trade show every year, pumping out a press release when they think they've got something to say. But largely speaking, that's what marketing encapsulates. For me, when I'm looking for visionary B2B companies, it's turning to that second group, the ones who have been operating within a certain status quo for a long period of time, but they recognize that there is a need to evolve lest they become extinct. Because every industry, every sector, every vertical is changing, some faster than others, but it is a certainty that if you do not evolve beyond that conventional, predominantly sales-driven go-to-market commercial strategy, you will begin feeling the effects of younger, nimbler competitors nipping at your heels. So when I say visionary, it's looking at that second group of customers who recognize that, and they're willing and prepared to invest in making the changes they need to make to continue winning business from the modern day B2B buyer.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think you have just made me realize that you've defined who we work with as well, actually. So I have a meeting with our CMO later, and something that we'll be talking about is that ICP for us. And you've just explained them. So I'm just gonna reply back with what you just said.
Fantastic.
When you talk about rewrite the status quo, what does that typically look like for you in terms of what you're doing there?
I think it's about understanding the difference between in-market and out-of-market customers. As B2B marketers, if you spend any time on social media, on LinkedIn, undoubtedly you will have come across the stat from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute that 95% of B2B buyers on general across any industry are considered out of market at any given time. That is to say that they fit every attribute and characteristic that you're looking for to define what is a good fit customer, but they're just not in a position to buy right now. They don't have that demand to buy right now. That means that there's 5% of in-market customers. And this 5% is where the majority of B2B businesses focus their time and their attention in trying to capture that in-market demand. But it's not just you trying to capture it, it's all of your competitors as well. And for the most part, you're ignoring or you're not investing in creating demand with that 95% of great fit customers, but just not ready to buy today. So when we talk about, rewriting the playbook, upending the status quo, it's about helping B2B businesses think about what can we do to nurture that 95% vast majority of out of market customers that we could be selling to at some point in the future, building out in turn medium to long term pipeline. And I think that's where a lot of B2B businesses fall short. It's also the area where marketing best plays, right? If there are customers who are ready to buy, sales are the best function within the business to help them get over the line and convert. When it comes to generating and nurturing that demand with the remaining 95%, that very much fits in marketing's wheelhouse. So that's what we try to do here at B2B Better.
Yeah, that's really interesting and obviously very, very well needed and worthwhile activity to be supporting the businesses with. In terms of yourself, so at B2B Better, I know you've got a very successful podcast and you create lots of awesome content. How do you streamline and optimize all of the content and marketing that you do for yourself?
So as a business owner, I think it's important that you practice what you preach. And by no means am I saying that there is not a place for direct sales, referrals, cold outbound. There is definitely a place when it comes to capturing demand within that 5% of in-market customers. But I've always said with B2B Better as a business, especially as a solo operator right now, I want to do as little of that as possible. I want to nurture as much demand as I can well in advance with the 95% of out-of-market customers so that they're coming to me when that switch flips and they are in need for strategic marketing services. Yeah. Mm. And the way I do that is by creating high quality, pain point focused content through the podcast, which is also named B2B Better, and my newsletter B2B Bite, and being active in the channels where my buyers are spending time, which is predominantly, LinkedIn. So just to break those three down, I have a weekly podcast, ranges from 30 to 60 minutes in length. The format is narrative driven. I will interview an expert on a particular subject that my customers care about, be that, account-based marketing, be that marketing strategy more generally, be that, TikTok is a popular subject right now and what place do B2B organizations have in that. I'll interview an expert and then I will, in the post-production, cut in my own insights and takeaways based on the responses they've given me. So it results in quite I like to think highly polished, high production value piece of content, as opposed to just a kind of hit record on my Zoom call and publish it with minimal to no editing. I think that helps kind of differentiate it in a sea of B2B marketing podcasts. That's the first thing. Second thing is the weekly newsletter called B2B Bite that goes out to 3,000 plus B2B marketing professionals every single week. That could just be a summary of the podcast episode I've just published, or it could be a subject or a topic that keeps coming up with me with clients that I want to provide some insight on. I kind of think of it as a bit of a journal just to help me keep a record of all the things I'm talking and thinking about at any given time, to which I can share with my database. And then finally, there's LinkedIn, where I try and post something every single day. I treat it as a bit of a blog in terms of my mindset. Just write, several hundred words on a topic and publish it out as a LinkedIn post. But the really important part of my time on LinkedIn is also making sure I'm not just publishing, but I'm engaging with the community, both my own and otherwise. So those are the three channels I operate on. And we can talk a little bit about the production behind each of those and how I've streamlined and optimized it over the last 3 years that I've been active. But that's how it breaks down. And it's from those three channels that, having launched the business fairly recently, enabled me to generate over £50,000 in pipeline before I'd actually even started officially the business. So, yeah.
Wow. Just goes to show the power of content, doesn't it? The power of knowing who you are, communicating with, and then creating targeted content and, like you said, high quality differentiated content as well. What do you think you've done to really stand above that crowd as well? Because, as someone in the B2B space as well on LinkedIn. It's a very crowded space of people talking about even just niching it to, B2B tech, SaaS, that area as well. What do you think you've done to manage to nail that and actually get that engagement and get noticed?
I wish I had like a really defined kind of framework that I could just say and your listeners could take away and apply to their own. I don't, but there are certain things that I will call out, and hopefully at the end they could begin to, resemble some sort of framework. I think the first is just understanding who you're talking to. And I think if you are a marketer on LinkedIn, it is very easy to feel like there is just a lot of noise. And how do you compete with that noise? Dare I say the vast majority of that noise are marketers talking to other marketers. And
100%.
unless your ICP is marketers, then you kind of need to just ignore it and focus on who exactly are you trying to target and creating content for them. I definitely fell into this trap, right? Like I want to sound clever amongst my peers and contemporaries. So I'll spend, at the beginning, I was spending time talking about dark social and, the dark funnel and all this kind of stuff. But, you go into a meeting with a CEO, CFO of like a IT system integrator and you say the words dark social, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? I have no idea what that means. Talk to me in terms I understand, marketing, sales. How can I be better at both of those? So, the content that you then put out needs to reflect who it is that you're actually talking to. When looked at by other marketers, maybe it's considered a little bit basic, a little bit simple. But when you're talking to your customers, it's exactly what they need to hear because it's where they are in their journey of discovery or whatever. So the first thing is about understanding who your target buyer is and creating content for them. I think finding ways to be distinctive, whether that is in the format or the branding or the design of the material that you put out, is very important. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, which I'd highly appreciate anyone listening to this doing, you can reach me, Jason Bradwell. I'm the guy with the bright yellow background in my profile photo. And that was a deliberate choice because it stands out in your feed like that bright neon yellow. And in fact, I've been walking through conference halls in the past where someone will stop me and say, "You're the yellow guy."
Really?
They don't know my name. They don't know anything about me. They don't know what I talk about, but they know me as like the yellow guy. And that combined with like the format of my podcast, which I've already mentioned, which is more narrative driven versus just Q&A interview style. These are just little components I've learned over time, just slight tweaks to the format or the design or the branding that just help you stand out a little bit from a sea of sameness, a really saturated place, which is B2B marketing. So that would be the second thing. And I think if I had to round it off, the third thing in terms of standing out, consistency, I guess, is what comes to mind. Like it is a long game when it comes to creating an effective content program. And whether you're a brand or you're an individual, I've sat on both sides, at times it can feel a little bit hopeless. I keep putting stuff out consistently every single week. And it's just not, the numbers aren't going up enough for me. I want this to go quicker. But you have to stick at it, and eventually you will hit a tipping point because you'll build enough insights, you'll collect enough data to understand what is the kind of content types that resonate the most. What are the formats that people just seem really to enjoy? How can I evolve and iterate over time to make this, based on feedback, the best version of what it is it can be? And you can only get there if you're consistent. So even if you feel helpless and hopeless, I should say, that things aren't working, just getting the reps in and being consistent and constantly appearing in people's feeds, you will hit that tipping point. And just being present can help you stand out.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. In terms of being consistent, it helps if you have certain systems and processes and ways that you kind of optimize the workflow. You mentioned it before in terms of you've developed that for yourself and your content. Do you have any tips of you managing to stay consistent with quite a lot of different types of content on a weekly basis?
Time blocking is really
Yeah.
important for me. So in my calendar every week, I'll make sure there is a big old block of time for me to work on content, whether that's editing the podcast, whether that's reaching out to guests, whether that's writing the newsletter. There is just a permanent block of time in my diary every week so I can focus on doing that and only that. Just trying to fit it in, half an hour here, 15 minutes there. For me personally, just doesn't work. I need to have that concentrated focus. I think automation is a really powerful tool. If you can figure out the kind of mundane, repetitive tasks that you continually do when it comes to producing content, and if there is a way that they can be automated using a tool like Zapier, for example, that could really help take off some of the heavy lift when it comes to content production, if used well. And outsourcing, like I as a solo creator, have not outsourced any of my content production. It's something I want to change because I believe that there are people out there who are cost effective and far better at things like audio mixing or kind of scheduling social posts or creating transcripts / show notes. These are all things that don't need me doing them. They can be outsourced to other individuals for a cheap price and be done far quicker. In fact, ensure they are done, right? Because far more often than not, I just won't publish show notes because I don't have the time to do it.
Yeah.
So when I worked for a brand, we outsourced a lot of that kind of menial task, those menial tasks that could not be automated, to really cheap freelancers that we found on Upwork or, Fiverr or whatever. So those are the three things, time blocking, automation, outsourcing. That's how you can, 3 ways of looking to streamline your workflows.
And have you done much in the world of like AI from the point of view of there's an awful lot of conversation at the moment about obviously ChatGPT and, how AI is creeping into workflows for all aspects of content creation, publishing, production, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I've used ChatGPT a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's a great tool for ideation. I think, as I've been struggling a little bit to think of how to phrase a particular paragraph or to come up with a few ideas, the fact that you can just kind of like feed in an input and get an output that can then just help unstick you and keep you moving, I found very useful. I've not used it as of this point, other than just for a small experiment, like copy pasting the content that it produced and putting it out there into the world. I did actually write a LinkedIn post a couple of weeks ago, which was purely ChatGPT. And that was just to see like what happened. Did it get like a hiring number of likes and posts? And it didn't. And I think that kind of talks to the fact that we shouldn't be too scared just yet that these tools are going to take our jobs as content creators, because they're not quite there yet. Could get there though. One thing that I've been playing around with in the last couple of weeks is how do I combine ChatGPT in some of my Zapier workflows. So I've set one up, which is basically when I finish editing a podcast episode, I drop it into a Google Drive folder. That episode is then through Zapier sent to Trint, where a transcript is created. That transcript is then pulled back into Google Drive into a separate folder. That transcript is then thrown into OpenAI with the command create show notes based on this transcript, which will then take that output from OpenAI and put it back into a Google Drive folder. So without me doing anything, I've just uploaded the file into a Google Drive folder. I've gotten a transcript and I've gotten AI generated show notes based off of that transcript. Those show notes need some work, right? They can't be taken as is. Spelling errors, grammar errors, B to B is always, B and then the word to and then B, things like that. And, sometimes it misses a little bit of the nuance that I think a human can provide when it comes to interpreting a transcript and creating a set of premium show notes. But it gets me like 60-70% of the way there. And I mean, as a solo creator that's not outsourcing anything at the moment, I'll take it. So, there are ways to leverage ChatGPT, OpenAI to take off some of the lift if you can think through it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I haven't actually even used ChatGPT yet. Every time I go in it just says that it's at capacity and you can't get on
Yeah.
it. I am going to have a play around with it. And a few people in the team have been messaging me saying that they've got in and they've been playing around with it. I guess jumping over the conversation towards outsourcing and looking at sort of B2B businesses, likely have a small marketing team and they are looking at what do we keep in house? What do we outsource? What do you typically go in and start to review and often end up recommending you should probably look to outsource this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it really depends on the nature of the organization. There, a lot of the businesses that I work with are at the very beginning of their journey when it comes to building out a marketing function. They could be a very well established business, as I've already mentioned. They could be worth tens of millions of dollars, but it's all off the back of the referral network that their executive team, their sales team have, or cold outbound, or attending trade shows, things like that. It's not a modern day marketing function in my eyes. And there is an argument to say that these organizations would be necessary for them to invest in an in-house marketing function in the short to medium term because their industry just doesn't, it's just not a necessity, just based on, what they're selling and how it's sold and how it's bought. In those cases, bringing on someone like myself as a fractional CMO can be really beneficial because it gives you that exposure to a senior marketing leader who can begin building a foundation and generating a business case that investment in modern day marketing makes sense. And then at some point in the future, facilitate a transition to an in-house team. And if you go down that road, you're outsourcing everything. You're outsourcing strategy, you're outsourcing planning, you're outsourcing execution. On the other side of the scale, if you're like in a B2B SaaS business, I think, I'm looking at ClickUp on one of my other screens here, they're in a business model where, they need to have that in-house marketing function to really accelerate their revenue generation capabilities. They need to be on all channels. They need to, they need that momentum, that velocity within their business, that it just makes sense. So I think it really depends on the type of business that you operate in.
Yeah, I completely agree. Reflecting on season 1 of this podcast, talking to like heads of content marketing and heads of marketing at fairly large tech companies, the theme across that question tended to be SEO. Like SEO seemed to be fairly standard. We don't we don't hire in-house SEO expertise. We tend to work with an agency. But then anything after SEO, as you said, kind of really did vary a lot more depending on all of the factors that you discussed. In terms of your content marketing initiatives, so you've worked with all sorts of different companies as an advisor and also obviously in-house over your career. What would you say is a really memorable standout content marketing initiative that you have been involved in, and kind of what were the results of that?
I again, just to frame this question, I have worked for a lot of organizations or with a lot of organizations that are at the beginning of their journey when it comes to building out a marketing team or a marketing function. And as such, they're not taking out Super Bowl ad slots, right? They're not like hiring massive billboards that are sitting in Piccadilly Circus and like doing amazing brand building campaigns where their logos being, shone on the Empire State Building or anything like that. What they do, what they historically have done before they think about, how can we market in the modern day, is they work with a lot of trade associations or trade magazines. And I dare I say they've been hoodwinked a little bit in terms of, spending a lot of money on what is a very poor activation. We get a logo placement in an email blast, or they'll put on an event and they'll say our name while they're introducing a panel or something like that. So when I go into businesses that have these kind of trade association, trade journalism relationships, my first question is, how can we squeeze more value out of that partnership? These companies are creating content, right? And sometimes on our behalf. Are we really satisfied with like a crummy, generic white paper that's blasted out to a couple of hundred people and we have no idea of tracking? We have no idea like what it actually delivers. No, we shouldn't be. We shouldn't be happy with that, and we should be holding them to account to, push the fold on what's actually achievable. To that end, a really memorable content program that we worked on with one customer was developing a co-hosted podcast between the trade association and the brand. It would have been easy for us to say you launch a podcast, we'll do a bunch of pre-rolls and mid-roll ads in that, and that will be, great activation. But I don't think that goes far enough. Like, as a solutions provider, we're in the business of selling expertise. It makes sense for one of our experts then to be involved in this piece of content. So we'll put up one of our experts as a co-host alongside one of your top journalists. And every week you'll interview a hand-picked list of potential clients of ours on subjects that matter to them and matter to your audience. And that was a really great piece of content for a couple of reasons. One, it meant that we were just activating the relationship in a way that we had never done before, or none of that trade partners had ever done before. Two, it really allowed us to position ourselves as the expert. We're here not selling our solution. We're here talking about the industry and the challenges and the opportunities that we see in the space. It allowed us to connect with prospects in a non-aggressive way. I kind of say aggressive in a sense of like, it meant that we didn't have to send a cold outreach email, a cold pitch to them via email. It meant that we could, connect with them in a mutually beneficial setting. They're getting exposure because they're being invited onto the podcast. That's not just being shared by us as a brand, but by this like trade association, trade magazine with huge reach that they want to be, associated with. It kept leadership happy, because they saw something cool happening that they'd never seen before. And, podcasts are really in vogue at the moment in B2B. So that was just a really cool activation of, slight tweak to what was an existing relationship. And it ended up being, if memory serves, the second highest performing podcast produced by that trade association, of all time. And it had like a really high completion rate, like, because the content was so tailored to the audience it was being delivered to. Like 85% of all streams went 75% of the way. And considering it's like an hour-long episode, that's a really good show. And yeah, I mean, long term, we did have proof points where we were talking to customers who referenced that podcast and having listened to that podcast before picking up the phone and speaking to us. So there was also a pipeline angle there as well. So, that's the example that stands out to me.
Yes, it's such a good example. I think it kind of provides so much more background with what you said about breaking through the status quo with the companies you work with, because you took an example of a business that sounded exactly as you said at the start, kind of like an older fashioned marketing business, and you broke that status quo, did something really different, and such a good example. I love that idea of the co-hosted with the trade organization and the podcast aspect. So amazing example. Let's talk about things to avoid. So do you have a funny story or cautionary tale of a content marketing mishap?
We did have one example where we were organizing this webinar series where we had a really high profile guest due to come in and to join this webinar. This was like right in the midst of the pandemic, and there's a lot of promotion done in advance across our channels that they were going to come on, and we just never sent them the calendar invite.
So really?
They didn't turn up, which is totally.
Oh no! What did you do? Did you just make Did you ad lib and deliver something, or did you?
Yeah, so we ended up actually saving it in the end because we emailed them like half an hour and we realized that this invite had never gone out, that this is going to happen, and we're really, really sorry and apologetic. And if you can make it, please, do make it. But obviously, if you can't, we'll just send an email out telling people it's been cancelled. Unfortunately, they could make it. But I guess the takeaway there is, just you need to have some sort of process. Like it doesn't matter if you're like in a team, like a big team or a solo marketer, just have a process, have a template of actions that need to occur when you're setting up a recurring content type, be it like a webinar or a podcast or a newsletter or what have you, because you remember, you think you know everything it is that you need to do, but just in the heat of trying to keep all these plates spinning and get things through the door, just like the simplest, stupidest activities just slip through the net, that can end up being quite catastrophic, as it was in that case. But we managed to save it, fortunately.
Yeah, I think you said a moment ago that you were glancing over at your ClickUp board. So big shout out to the Trellos and the ClickUps and the Basecamps and of the world, all those tools you can use to do exactly what you just said and have a have a checklist, a repeatable. When we run a webinar checklist, and do not forget to tick send the invitation out.
And it's also about having the discipline to like actually follow it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how senior you are, how often you've done this process in the past. Just give it a cursory glance every so often, just to make sure that I've ticked off everything. Because as I say, I've been doing this for 10 bloody years. I forgot to send the invite out because I thought it'd been done, or I would have. Of course, I would have done it. I'm not. I've done it a million times. So just having the discipline, the tool itself is a tool. It needs the process and the discipline around it to actually make it effective.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to finish up with 3 quick fire questions. So what is one takeaway tip you'd give to other content marketers to optimize content?
In order to optimize the consistency of your content output, you want to just start in one place. So pick one channel or one artifact that you want to create consistently and focus entirely on that for a period of time until you have got it nailed. You've figured out what resonates with your audience in terms of the content itself. You understand the channel and how to distribute, and you've built a process to get things out of the door consistently every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it is, the cadence that you've set. And only until you've got that do you look out and move on to other channels. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't repurpose. You can and you should repurpose. If you're creating a podcast, it's a great asset to like rip the transcript, sending out as an email newsletter, create a blog, do a Twitter thread, whatever. That's totally cool. And that should be part of your kind of, your journey of discovery on this, with this new content and this new channel. But if you have a podcast and then you think, I also want to set up a newsletter, and it's going to be a distinct, separate asset compared to the podcast, just be mindful before diving in with 2 feet if you're still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work on the podcast front. Classic marketing dilemma. You spread yourself too thin, you dilute the potency of everything. So just be mindful of that.
Yeah. What is a typically overlooked or undervalued tool that you'd recommend to content marketers?
I think ClickUp, or any kind of project management piece of software. It's very common. I'm sure you see it all the time that this stuff is managed in spreadsheets or in emails or Word documents or whatever. And I mean, there are tools out there that are either free or super cost effective that can just help provide some structure around consistent content help. So if you're sitting there listening to this and your content strategy and content plan is sitting on a spreadsheet, just consider looking at something like Trello or ClickUp as a means of just getting on the road to efficiency.
Yeah, 100% agree. And finally, so on B2B Content Strategist, we speak to, leaders like yourself in the B2B marketing world, particularly with like a tech focus. Who do you think we should be speaking to on the show? Who stands out to you?
I would recommend I would recommend one of my former guests on B2B Better, a guy called Ronnie Higgins, who is the head of content for OpenPhone. And I love chatting with Ronnie, both when we're recording and when we're not, because I think he has a real modern day view on building out a media program, a media organization within a B2B business. I think it's become a little bit cliche to see on LinkedIn, like platforms like LinkedIn, like every B2B company is a media company.
Media company, yeah.
Yeah, And
yeah.
Whilst Ronnie definitely subscribes to the idea that creating high quality, consistent content that could be billed as media is the right play for B2B organizations to make in 2023 and beyond. He's also a realist. And he has spent a lot of time thinking about the theory behind building out media programs and where it makes sense and where it doesn't and how to do it. So I'd recommend speaking to Ronnie.
Brilliant. Awesome. I'll be getting in touch with him. Well, Jason, thank you so much. It's been an awesome conversation, really great episode. I'm sure everyone listening is going to have taken so much value from it. I think you already mentioned about connecting with you on LinkedIn. Is that the best place that you would like people to go to connect with you?
Yes, please. Yeah, you can find me, Jason Bradwell, big yellow background in my profile photo. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Jason R. Bradwell, though I spend less time there nowadays with the whole Elon thing.
Elon.
But yeah, LinkedIn is the best channel for sure.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason.